agricultural industry, which is incredibly important in this country for food production. And also, I think, during the week of the Chelsea Flower Show, we can see for ourselves the green-fingered talents of this country, which need to continue and be supported.
We now come to questions to the Attorney-General. And we will start with Scott Benton.
Question number 1, Mr. Speaker.
Attorney-General.
Mr. Speaker, with your permission, I'll answer questions 1 and 11 together. This government is committed to delivering justice for victims of serious violence, and I can confirm that the CPS has prosecuted over 103,000 cases of serious violence, firearm offences and homicides in 2022, with a conviction rate of over 84%.
Scott Benton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There have been a number of knife crime incidents in Blackpool over recent weeks which have concerned my constituents, not least a disturbing case in which a man was arrested after carrying a 16-inch machete. What action is being taken by the CPS to reduce knife crime offending both in Blackpool and across Lancashire as a whole?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm very grateful to my honourable friend and pay tribute to him for his interest and for his knowledge in this area, not least because he always seems to get drawn for these questions week in, week out, and I pay tribute to him for that. Of course, the CPS has been instrumental in the serious violence reduction order pilots, which are aimed at reducing knife crime. And it's right to say that these orders will provide an extra tool to help crack down on violent crime, and the CPS look at both breaches of that and also the orders originally. Mr. Speaker, the law tour next week is in fact visiting the North West CPS area, which is both my honourable friends and also, Mr. Speaker, it is yours. You'd both be more than welcome to join us on that tour and to see the CPS and the police working together on this issue.
Ian Levy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituents and I have been deeply shaken by recent incidents of violent crime in my constituency. Losing a loved one to senseless violence is a tragedy that no one should ever have to endure. Will my right honourable friend please agree to meet with me to discuss these cases that have caused concern to my constituents and how we can better support victims and their families by ensuring the prosecution of violent crime is a priority?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm grateful to my honourable friend, and I pay tribute to him for his hard work on behalf of his constituents. And of course, Mr. Speaker, it is right to say that tackling serious violence and improving the support that we offer to victims is a priority for this government. That is shown not least through the Victims and Prisoners Bill and the revised Victims Code. And of course, I'll be very happy to meet with my honourable friend to discuss this further.
Jim Chapman.
Speaker, I thank the Minister very much for his response to those questions. Northern Ireland has seen more than its share of violent crime, but in relation to the knife crime that both the honourable gentleman referred to, in Northern Ireland we've seen an increase in the number of knife murders, of attempted murders, of those who are carrying knives or other sharp instruments. So can I ask the Minister what opportunity has had to discuss these matters, as I know he's a very dutiful Minister, with the pertinent Minister in Northern Ireland to ensure that we can also see some benefit from this as well. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman. May I, in turn, return the compliment to him and pay tribute to him for his diligence in this House and for all that he does. In fact, the Attorney-General has had very close links with Northern Ireland, and recently both the Attorney and I, and also the Advocate-General for Scotland, had the privilege of being called to the bar in Northern Ireland. I'm determined to keep those conversations and channels open, and he will know that the Home Office is consulting now on knife crime with a closing date of the 6th of June.
Dr. Rupert.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Number 2, please.
Mr. Speaker, with permission, I will answer questions 2 and 5 together. Tackling violence against women and girls remains one of the government's top priorities. We're doing everything possible to make our streets and homes safer for women and girls. Since the launch of the Joint Action Plan, we've seen a significant increase in charge volumes for adult rape since January 2021.
Dr. Rupert.
I thank the Minister, but more than 1 in 9 rape prosecutions were dropped last year because victims withdrew their support, crushed by what can be a 3-year wait for their day in court and the humiliation of victim blaming. So will she fix these and accept the Joint Inspectorate's conclusions that the system's obviously failing rape victims when many find the legal process overlong and more harrowing than the original offence?
Attorney General.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Honourable Lady for her interest in this matter. It's something that she and I have discussed for many years as colleagues on the Justice Select Committee. It is important that justice is given as speedily as possible. We know that. Digging into the attrition of victims in cases, particularly of rape, is very salutary and one of the reasons why the government has increased the money available to support victims by fourfold in recent times. On the law tour next week, which is Solicitor General reference, we will be visiting an ISFA in Nottingham. And we know that where a victim has support, they are 50% less likely to withdraw from proceedings.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've heard from many women in my constituency who've been victims of domestic violence and abuse. They've reported it to the police, but they're still not getting the support or the justice they deserved. Rather than warm words, can the Attorney General explain why the number of charges for domestic abuse and violence has not just failed to keep pace with the rise in reported offences, but has gone so dramatically backwards?
Attorney General.
I thank the Honourable Lady for her interest in this matter as well. And I think far more than warm words are being provided by the government. What we've been working on very closely is real joint working between the CPS and the police. We know that this has significantly increased the number of successful prosecutions in RASO cases. We're now rolling out a similar but not identical form of working in domestic abuse cases, and I think the Honourable Lady will be pleased to know that in her CPS area, the volume of adult rape suspects charged has gone up 41% in the last year.
Chair of the Select Committee's Robert Neal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, the Attorney agreed. It's important to remember that when there is sufficient evidence to put a case before a jury, the conviction rate for rapes and serious sexual offences is entirely consistent and on a par with that for other serious offences of violence. Isn't the real challenge to ensure that the file quality of evidence presented by the police to the Crown Prosecution Service is sufficient to bring charges in the first place? That's the issue that was highlighted in the Joint Inspection Report. Isn't that where we should be paying our most attention?
Attorney General.
Well, this is a Justice Select Committee alumni session, and it's always good to hear from our chair. He makes, of course, Mr. Speaker, as we would all expect, an important point. It is very true that if the CPS can only prosecute the cases that are referred to them, they then work out which ones to prosecute using a two-stage legal test. If you strip out the guilty pleas, they're running at a conviction rate of between 50 and 60%. They always prosecute where there's sufficient evidence, and it is in the public interest to do so.
Elaine Saxby.
Question 6, please, Mr. Speaker.
Standing on this one, you're standing before. Let's come to the Shadow Minister.
Thank you very much. Mr. Speaker, the Attorney has been discussing rape prosecution statistics, and I'd like to ask another question in relation to that, which is that the National World reported last month that there have been 1,600 cases over the past 5 years where a suspect accused of rape and investigated for rape ended up being charged with a lesser offence. Now, we all know that type of undercharging is not uncommon, but the allegation in the National World was that those 1,600 cases were then counted towards the charge rate for rape, even though no one had been charged with a rape offence. So can the Attorney General tell us whether that is true? And if so, does that mean that the charge rate for rape is even lower than we currently think?
Mr. Speaker, I too saw that report, and I also asked for further clarification of the material within it. And I have been told that for a force to have charged an alternative offence, the facts and the evidence must be extremely similar and must relate to the victim and the circumstances. I have also been told, but I have not dug into every single one of those cases, that some of the reporting that she refers to may relate to historic sexual abuse, and that may explain some of the figures.
Drew Hendry.
Question number 3, Mr. Speaker.
Attorney General.
by long-standing convention, whether the law officers have been asked to provide advice, and the contents of any such advice is not disclosed outside government.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Nearly 200 civil society organisations have, covering human trafficking, modern slavery, asylum and refugees, have called on the government to immediately withdraw the illegal immigration bill because, as it stands, it will breach multiple conventions and agreements in international law. So will the Attorney-General work with her colleagues to revise and review these provisions to change them, or is she happy to underline that hers is a law-breaking government?
As I said, Mr. Speaker, there is a long-standing convention, which means that I cannot go into the legal advice which may or may not have been given. I can say simply that we do consider the bill to be consistent with our international obligations.
SNP spokesperson Stuart C. MacDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Attorney-General will know that concern has been expressed on both sides of this House that the bill will make it even harder to successfully prosecute traffickers. In short, that's because victims will not come forward if it simply means they're going to be detained and then removed to Rwanda. So what, can I ask, is the Attorney-General going to do about that?
Attorney-General.
Mr. Speaker, I'm sorry, but once again, I can't go into the content of any legal advice that might have been given. I would, however, refer the honourable gentleman to the explanatory notes which accompanied the illegal migration bill, which do set out the circumstances in which ECAT is operating at the moment.
Sir Desmond Swin.
Sir.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the SFO has implemented wide-ranging reforms following the recommendations made by Sir David Calvert-Smith and Brian Altman KC. The SFO's strategic plan sets out a programme to modernise, build on capabilities and protect the UK's reputation as a safe place to do business.
Sir Desmond.
Just how much detail will he require to properly implement Sir David's recommendation on oversight? We do need to keep a tight rein on the remaining tenure of the current director, don't we?
Well, as ever, I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend for his question, and I'm sure he will have seen the written ministerial statement that was laid before this House yesterday. And of course, the update confirmed that the planned review is ongoing. Additionally, since April of this year, case lists prepared for superintendents' meetings include all cases that may have required case consent, and importantly, there is more explicit signposting to high-risk cases.
Shadow Minister Andy Swalter.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Could we talk about the fraud strategy, which sadly is itself a bit of a fraud? As revealed by Spotlight on Corruption, the new National Fraud Squad is patched together with £100 million already announced last year and 400 officers, up to 300 of whom already in post. No new money, precious few new staff. How on earth is that going to make a dent in the £6.8 billion a year lost to consumer fraud, let alone the £21 billion a year in public sector fraud his government lets run rife?
Minister.
Well, I'm very sorry that the honourable gentleman doesn't welcome the strategy. He was calling for it, and indeed the Shadow Attorney-General was calling for it at the last AGO's questions. We promised that it would be delivered soon. I remember that exchange, and indeed it was delivered soon after these questions. He will know that that strategy sits within the Home Office. That is absolutely right, and I will continue to work with the Home Office on the fraud strategy, and I'm sure he will be pleased, as my right honourable friend was, with the written ministerial statement yesterday, specifically on the subject of this question.
Lynn Saxby.
Question 6, please, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, with permission, I'll answer questions 6 and 8 together. We're committed to increasing the volumes of prosecutions and supporting more victims of domestic abuse. For example, we've now ensured that victims now have much longer to report offences.
Lynn Saxby.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can my right honourable friend outline what is being done to encourage the reporting of rape and sexual assault in rural areas where victims may be less likely to report these crimes due to distant support services?
The Honourable Lady is a great champion for her rural area. She will be pleased to know that in the CPS area of South West England, we consistently see one of the highest conviction rates for rape and domestic abuse. Her area is covered by Operation Soteria, which is testing new ways of working between the police and the CPS.
Bob Black.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The breakdown in relationships, particularly from women in families from the Indian subcontinent, is a stigma, and many women are either forced to remain in a coercive relationship or forced to return to that abuser. What measures could my right honourable friend take to ensure that those women affected in that way are given full support through the Crown Prosecution Service and indeed assisted to rebuild their lives?
The Honourable Gentleman is a great campaigner for Harrow East and for all of the communities that live there. He'll be pleased to know that CPS London are also working hard, and this week they're holding an event in his constituency to develop the Domestic Abuse Joint Justice Plan, where colleagues from across the criminal justice system will come together to increase prosecutions in the cases that he's outlined.
Andrew Bridgen.
Number 7, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the Economic Crime and Corporate Transparency Bill includes provisions to extend the SFO's pre-investigative powers, allowing them to compel people to furnish the SFO with information earlier in cases of domestic corruption and fraud.
Andrew Bridgen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Right Honourable Gentleman for his answer. Would he agree to meet with me and a number of whistleblowers at his earliest convenience, and we will provide him with evidence of corruption and fraud in financial institutions, financial regulators and the judiciary?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the FCA has published guidelines in July 2017, referring back to the money laundering regulations in 2017, and that is right. And he might want to direct his inquiries towards the Economic Secretary to the Treasury. In relation to his substantive questions about prosecutions, of course it's right that both the SFO and the CPS operate independently. The Attorney General is responsible for safeguarding that independence, and she takes that role incredibly seriously.
Andrew Ladson.
Question 9.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, the Attorney-General laid a written ministerial statement outlining the progress made on the delivery recommendations made by Sir David, and these demonstrate a significant progress in implementing all 29 recommendations.
Andrew.
Thank you, sir. A constituent of mine whose husband was a very powerful and strong professional footballer had all of his life's savings and investments defrauded in a huge organised fraudulent scam. And since then, in spite of his losses and being the victim, he and many of his colleagues have been pushed to absolute bankruptcy by further claims from other government departments for consequential taxes and so on already fraudulent activities. Can my honourable friend tell me what more he can do to make sure that government departments don't further punish those victims?
I'm very grateful indeed to my right honourable friend for raising this case. She's right to do so, and I know that the Attorney-General is also familiar herself with the details of this case. Mr. Speaker, may I just note one thing that may be of relevance and help my right honourable friend. The CPS has recovered assets worth £480 million through confiscation orders, and in terms of victims, £105 million of that has been returned to victims of crime by way of compensation.
Jeff Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Question 10.
Attorney General.
I'm honoured as Attorney General to play an important role in upholding the rule of law, which is fundamental to our Constitution. I'd like to thank the House of Lords Constitution Committee for its report. The Government published its response in March, and I'm looking forward to appearing before the committee next month.
Jeff Smith.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, the Constitution Committee said, and I quote, "The Government has twice knowingly introduced legislation which would breach the UK's international obligations and in doing so undermined the rule of law." They were referring to the Internal Market Bill and the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill. Does she accept that the Illegal Migration Bill is now the third such example and the first on this Attorney General's watch?
Attorney General.
No, I don't accept that. I am bound by the Law Officers Convention mentioned earlier, so that I can't comment on advice, even if it were provided by previous law officers. With regard to the two earlier bills he mentioned, the Government has published summaries of its legal position during the introduction of both those bills, and more recently in February this year on the Windsor Framework.
That completes questions. Those who wish to leave before we come to those questions. We come to the urgent question. Yvette Cooper.
To ask the Home Secretary to make a statement on the net migration and other migration figures today.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Net migration to the United Kingdom is far too high. That was already clear from the previous set of official data. The ONS have today amended their previous published estimate of net migration for the year ending June 2022 to 606,000. The statistics published today indicate that net migration has flatlined since then. In the year ending December 2022, they estimate that net migration remains at 606,000. These particularly high figures are in large part due to temporary and exceptional factors, such as the UK's Ukraine and Hong Kong BNO schemes. Last year, more than 200,000 Ukrainians and 150,000 Hong Kong British nationals overseas made use of the routes to life or time in the United Kingdom. These schemes command broad support from the British public, and we were right to introduce them. The government remains committed to reducing overall net migration to sustainable levels. That is a solemn promise we made to the British public in our manifesto, and we are unwavering in our determination to deliver it. This week, we announced steps to tackle the substantial rise in the number of student dependents coming to the UK. The package of measures will ensure that we can reduce migration whilst continuing to benefit from the skills and resources our economy needs, because universities should be in the education business, not the immigration business. We expect this package to have a tangible impact on net migration. Taken together with the easing of temporary factors, like our exceptional humanitarian offers, we expect net migration to fall to pre-pandemic levels in the medium term. Mr. Speaker, the public rightly expect us to control our borders, whether that is stopping the boats and addressing illegal migration, or whether it's ensuring levels of legal migration do not place undue pressure on public services, on housing supply, or integration. The government is taking decisive action on both counts. Under the points-based system we introduced post-Brexit, we can control immigration, we must control immigration, and we will.
Shadow Home Secretary Yvette.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today's extraordinary figures, including doubling the number of work visas since the pandemic, show that the Conservatives have no plan and no grip on immigration. They show the chaos in this government. Work visas are up 119% since before the pandemic. Conservatives have totally failed to tackle endemic skills shortages and get people back to work. Net migration is more than twice the level that ministers were aiming for, and considerably more than that compared to the Home Secretary's claimed aims. The asylum backlog is at a record high, the opposite of the Prime Minister's promise to clear the backlog this year, and less than 1% of last year's small boat arrivals have had a decision. Yet where is the Home Secretary, who is in charge of these policies? She's gone to ground. There are reports she's not even going to do media. She's not come to this House. She's in internal meetings, presumably more private courses arranged by the civil servants. What is the point of her? Net migration should come down, and we would expect it to do so. But the continued gap between the government's reality and the government's rhetoric and the reality is very damaging. Rightly, the UK has given support to Ukraine and Hong Kong. As rightly, we welcome international students who bring substantial benefits, but changes on family are sensible. International recruitment will also always be important, so we get the skills and talent we need. But this is a major increase in employers turning to overseas recruitment, and the government has no plan to increase training or properly tackle those skills shortages from here at home. So on health and social care, one of the biggest areas, why will he not agree
agree to Labour's plan to increase the training for nurses and doctors in the UK paid for by getting rid of the non-DOMS exemption? Will he ditch the unfair 20% wage discount that means shortage occupations can actually undercut and pay below the going rate, making it even harder to get the training and the skills and the fair recruitment that we need? Everyone should be paid the going rate. Mr. Speaker, there has been no action at all to address the huge backlog in the asylum system and to make sure that claims are properly processed. Immigration is important to this country, and we need a system that works, but it has to be properly controlled and managed, rather than the chaos that the government has created.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Labour Party feigns interest in cutting net migration, but I can assure the Right Honourable Lady that nobody is buying it. Last week, the chair of the Labour Party said that under Labour, net migration would go up in the short term. The leader of the Labour Party stood on a campaign pledge to defend freedom of movement if the UK remained outside of the EU. He said that there is a racist undercurrent which permeates all immigration laws. Does the Shadow Home Secretary agree with them? At every possible opportunity, Labour have voted against every measure that this government has brought forward to control migration. They voted against ending free movement, and at every turn they voted against measures to tackle illegal migration. Just recently they voted against the illegal migration bill, because the truth is, Mr. Speaker, the Labour Party have no interest in controlled and orderly migration. The Conservative Party is taking tangible steps to bring down net migration. Yesterday, we took a decisive step to clamp down on student dependence, because universities should be selling education, not immigration. Belatedly, the Shadow Home Secretary says she agrees with that. Mr. Speaker, the Conservative Party made a solemn promise to the British public to reduce net migration. Thanks to Brexit, we now have the tools at our disposal to do that. We can and we must deliver.
Father of the House, Sir Peter Bottomley.
Can I say to my right honourable friend, I'm sorry that while he's replying to the questions, 4 of the front benches were talking at the same time. I think that was to disguise the fact that their speaker appeared to agree with virtually every sensible element of the government's immigration and control policy. Can I ask my right honourable friend if he'll agree with me that if we go to beyond the Admission Order Office, there's the memorial plaque for the kinder transport. Some of those who feel most strongly against immigration now feel proud of what we did then. We have to remember that then and now, there are tens of millions of people around the world suffering because of violence in their own countries. Others who have bad governments to stop them allowing to have economic success where they are. As well as a good immigration policy, can I say that we ought to do all we can to help around the world better governance and a flexible economic system so that people can be happy living where they are and not feeling they have to come here for refuge.
Well, can I strongly agree with the Father of the House? We've made 2 very significant interventions in the last 2 years. One to provide sanctuary here in the United Kingdom for those Hong Kong BNOs who we have a moral and historical obligation to escape creeping authoritarianism in Hong Kong and make a new life here in the UK. We should be proud of that, and I expect in the years to come that scheme will be looked back on as a great success for this country. And secondly, the Ukraine schemes, which have led now to 200,000 Ukrainians coming to the UK, seeking sanctuary here, hundreds of thousands of British people literally opening up their homes to support them. Those were great schemes. We want to ensure schemes like that can continue and that the UK can be an even greater force for good in the world. That does not, however, mean that we should go slow on further measures to bring down net migration, because net migration does place very significant burdens upon communities in terms of housing and public services and our ability to integrate people. That's why we made further interventions this week, and we'll consider further ones in the future.
SNP spokesperson Stuart C. MacDonald.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And can I start by recognising the amazing contribution of all those who have come to make the UK their home, whether they are refugees or students, care workers, nurses, hospitality workers or anything else. And on these benches we say thank you. And of course it was right to welcome Ukrainians and BNOs from Hong Kong in 2022, and we welcome that as well. And I really hope that British politics isn't going to descend back into a horrible competition about who is going to be toughest on immigration. Mr Speaker, ministers often give us a nice soundbite about how they want a migration system that works for the whole of the UK. We say fine, but that doesn't mean precisely the same policies need to apply absolutely everywhere. In Scotland we have no need or desire for policies that are going to put international students off, keep families apart or make it harder to recruit the workers that we need. So does the Minister have anything to say about the unique challenges faced by different parts of the UK and how that shapes immigration policy? And will they even just look again at the remote areas pilot scheme, recommended by the Migration Advisory Committee and sought and voted for by the Scottish Parliament?
Minister.
Well, I wasn't expecting a question today arguing that net migration was too low. That seems to be the position of the SNP. But he makes a fair point that we need to take a pragmatic approach to particular sectors which are facing skills shortages, and also to think about the regional disparities across the whole of the United Kingdom. We don't believe that there should be separate immigration systems for the nations of the UK, and we don't believe that the evidence bears that out. There isn't a material difference in either unemployment or in economic inactivity between Scotland and the United Kingdom average. We do take account through the shortage occupation list of particular sectors that are facing challenges, and some of those are, of course, more focused in parts of the UK than others. Earlier in the week, for example, we made the decision to add further fishing occupations to the shortage occupation list to support the offshore fishing industry, which I hope he and fellow Scottish members of Parliament that have connections with the fishing industry will support.
Sir Edward Lee.
Some people in the Treasury seem to think that a good way to grow the economy is to fill the country up with more and more people. But this is bad for productivity and bad for British workers who are being undercut by mass migration from all over the world. Why is it that under the points-based system we allow people in earning only $26,000 a year, but the median UK salary is $33,000 a year? Isn't an obvious solution to this to insist that everybody comes in, is skilled and earns the median UK salary, and then we can boost productivity and get British people back to work?
Minister.
Well, my right honourable friend makes an important point that he's made in the past, and one which I have a lot of sympathy with. We both believe that we need a controlled migration system, and that net migration has a number of impacts upon communities, including further pressure on public services, further pressure on housing supply, and making it more difficult to integrate people into our country and maintain community cohesion. In some instances, high levels of net migration also place pressure downward on wages for the domestic economy and enable some employers to reach for the easy lever of importing foreign labour rather than training up their own British workforce. It's for those reasons that we created the points-based system that has a salary threshold, a freedom that we only have as a result of leaving the European Union, and if there are further changes to that system necessary in the future, we'll take them.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr Speaker. Well, local residents in my constituency are quite rightly shocked and concerned to hear that the Minister's Department is planning to house 300 asylum seekers in the Stradey Park Hotel, a totally disproportionate number for the village of Furness and local services. So will the Minister agree to meet with me to hear about local concerns, and what is he doing to prevent the need to commandeer the Stradey Park Hotel and to clear the Home Office backlog of 160,000 undetermined claims so those from safe countries can be returned and those who are genuine refugees can move out of hotels and be integrated in small numbers into suitable communities?
Well, I'm delighted to hear that the government has just chalked up another vote for the illegal migration bill, because you cannot have a position where you say you want open borders, unlimited numbers of individuals coming into this country, whether legally or legally, but you don't want them in your own constituency. That is an inconsistent approach. If the Honourable Lady feels so strongly and is getting such strong representations from her constituents, she should support the government's efforts to clamp down on illegal migration.
Sir Desmond Swade.
When they take effect, What estimate has he got for the impact of the measures they had announced yesterday?
Well, we believe that the measures we announced yesterday with regard to student dependence will have a tangible effect on the number of student dependents coming into the country, which, as the figures published by the ONS show, are very considerable today. It isn't right that universities, in some cases, are in the immigration business rather than the teaching and education one. We're clamping down on those practices, and that will help us to bring down net migration in the medium term. But let me be abundantly clear to my right honourable friend. Net migration is far too high, and we need to take measures to bring it down. We are not complacent. We want to make good on our promise to the British public.
Mr. Carmichael.
Speaker, the Immigration Minister seems to be making a very good case for increased wage inflation. I wonder what his colleagues in Treasury make of that, about the overall impact on the economy. Sector after sector, whether it's agriculture, hospitality, fishing, care services, all tell us that they need access to more skilled staff and that they simply do not have that access at the moment. The Minister stands at the dispatch box and talks about adding fishing to the shortage occupation list, but he completely ignores the fact that his refusal and the Home Secretary's refusal to lower the standard of English language skills that are required renders that absolutely meaningless for the fishing industry, and as a result of his decision, fishing boats in my constituency and right around the coast are tied up today. When is he going to start listening to business, and when did the Conservative Party stop doing that?
Well, the case that I was making was that you sustainably increase productivity by encouraging our employers to invest in their workforce and in technology, rather than simply reaching for the easy lever of further international labour. With respect to the fishing sector, we've made this measure today and it's been broadly welcomed, or this week it's been broadly welcomed by the fishing sector. I fundamentally disagree with the right honourable gentleman if his contention is that we should allow people into the United Kingdom on visas that have a route to settlement who cannot speak or write English. That is wrong. The standard of English that we maintain is a low standard, and we need it for health and safety at the workplace, to prevent exploitation, and to ensure people can integrate into our communities. That is absolutely the right approach.
Bob Black.
People who come to this country and want to work in our country and add value to our country are welcome. And clearly the concern is the illegal migration figures that have continued to grow. But given the figures have almost flatlined in terms of net migration, can my right honourable friend lay out for us what has happened over that period of time and what his plans are for the future to make sure that that total measure comes down?
Well, the ONS have changed its methodology and have increased the estimate that they made in the middle of last year to say that the number for net migration was 606,000 at that point when they previously published their data, and that since then they see no evidence that it's increased, which suggests that numbers are now flatlining. There are reasons to believe that the number of individuals coming on our humanitarian schemes from Hong Kong and Ukraine will reduce over the course of this year, although it's difficult to predict with any certainty, particularly with respect to Ukraine. The measures that we've taken this week with respect to student dependence will have a material impact, and so it's reasonable to assume that numbers will now be on a downward trajectory. But I don't want to give any impression of complacency. There's clearly a great deal more to be done, and if we need to take further interventions, we will do.
Live effort.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government's clearly lost control of all aspects of immigration and migration, and we have voted against the Nationality and Borders Bill and the Illegal Immigration Bill because we said they wouldn't work, and these figures show they haven't worked. So can he explain why it is that fewer than 1% of the people who arrived on small boats last year have actually had their asylum claims determined, and why is the figure so low?
Well, the honourable gentleman has voted against, or his party have voted against, every measure that this government has brought forward to control migration, whether that be legal or illegal. So his contention that the Labour Party would get control of migration is frankly laughable. It is important that we bring the backlog of cases down. That's why the Prime Minister, Home Secretary and I have set out a very clear plan to do that. We're seeing the dividends of that, and we expect the legacy backlog to be cleared over the course of the year, as we promised. It is not correct, however, to suggest that if you can process illegal migrants' claims faster, that will reduce the number of people coming into the country. In all likelihood, it will lead to an increase.
Martin Vickers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The anger and frustration of my constituents has been focused on illegal migration up until now, but that anger and frustration will grow when they consider these legal migration figures. We're creating, roughly speaking, 8 new parliamentary constituencies with this number, and if that continues, it's clearly unsustainable. The Minister spoke about medium-term plans to reduce the numbers, but what my constituents want to know is what short-term plans there are, other than those that have been announced recently. What else is the department considering?
Well said.
Well, my honourable friend makes a number of important points, and I think few members of this House have argued more consistently than I have that we need to build more homes in this country, and there needs to be a proper join-up between the numbers coming in and the way we accommodate them. There are, I'm afraid, intolerable pressures placed upon the country's public services and housing supply by sustained very high levels of net migration, and that's one of the reasons why we need to take action. We have announced a package of measures this week which include changes to the rules with respect to student dependents and increased enforcement activity as well to clamp down on egregious abuse of the system by education agents. As I said in answer to earlier questions, if there are more changes we need to make, we will do so.
Nick Smith.
Speaker, there's a huge gap between the government's rhetoric and reality. The Minister just said that the net migration figure would return to pre-pandemic levels in the medium term. So can he please say what his assessment is for the net migration figure for the year ahead?
Well, as I said in answer to earlier questions, we expect numbers to reduce. We're taking further steps this week, which we think will make a material difference. And if we need to do more, we will do, because net migration is far too high. I hope that the honourable gentleman, by his question, agrees with me in that regard, and that he will support measures that we take to bring the numbers down.
Bob Stewart.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If it were possible for everyone illegal that crossed the Channel in a small boat to be returned to France, that would be not only in our interest, but also in the interest of France, because it would stop people buffering on the northeast coast to try and get into this country. I know it's very difficult, but what chances are that being able to happen, because it would solve the problem?
We're making considerable efforts to deepen our relationship with the French government. In fact, next week I'm in Paris meeting our counterparts in the French Interior Ministry. The Prime Minister has achieved in short succession 2 significant deals which are leading to an increase in activity on the beaches, increased joint working on counter-organised immigration crime, and a new joint working centre in Lille that I'll be visiting shortly. If there was a possibility of a readmissions agreement with France, that's certainly something that the government would welcome. We've made that clear, and in our conversations both with President Macron and with the Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, we have offered a range of solutions that could lead to that. I would just say, however, that the previous readmissions agreement, Dublin, that operated during our time in the European Union, was not a successful one. In the last years of its operation, in fact, more people were being brought from France to the United Kingdom than sent from the UK to France. So this isn't a panacea, but if there are ways in which we can take this forward, we will do.
Madam Kaiser.
Mr Speaker. The Tories in the government benches in the Tory-like Labour Party will have the public believe that a rise in net migration is something to fear. Thus could it be further from the truth. Immigrants across all 4 nations make contribution to society, politically, economically and socially, from running small local businesses in our high streets to developing groundbreaking technology and working in the NHS. They're integral to society. Mr Speaker, in my maiden speech, I called for immigration to be devolved. Scotland wants immigration and our needs are different. Does the Minister agree that now is the time for immigration to be devolved to the Scottish Parliament?
Well, I don't agree with the Honourable Lady. As I've already said in answer to other questions, there is a limit to the number of individuals who can come into any country, regardless of the benefits that they might bring, because we have finite resources in terms of housing and access to public services. Independent advisers, including the Migration Advisory Committee, have said that there are a range of reasons why migrants choose to come to other parts of the UK over Scotland in some cases, and there is a role for the Scottish Government in tackling those issues.
Louis French.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Unsustainable levels of migration continue to have a significant impact on the likes of housing in the South East. Does my honourable friend agree that we must do all we can to reach sustainable levels of migration, and when it comes to illegal migration and processing asylum claims, ensure that the Home Office cracks down on both the people smugglers, whilst also ensuring the likes of Scotland takes its fair share of people rather than just continuing to turn up here and virtue signal?
Well, I strongly agree with my honourable friend. It's critical that we take action to bring down net migration. He represents one of the communities where there is intense pressure on housing, and it's a struggle for many young people and those on lower incomes to get on the housing ladder. We have to be cognizant of that when setting our migration policies. He's absolutely right with respect to the SNP. They are, I'm afraid, humanitarian NIMBYs. They come here and preach, but their actions never meet up with their words are always greater than their actions.
Karen Smith.
Thank you. Mr Speaker, somewhat unusually this morning, we seem to have learnt something new from the dispatch box, which is that the Home Office inability to progress applications, resulting in many people living in hotels, including in Bristol and across the country, means that the holding pattern will remain for some time. And that may be, in fact, a deliberate policy. And as the Minister said, if they were progressed, there would be more. That is what he has said. He can clarify. So the question is really, how long are people expected to live in hotels in cities across the country? What is the support being given to local authorities, as my friend from Connethley just asked? And what is the ultimate plan that the government has for these people?
I didn't say that, and the Honourable Lady should check the record after this urgent question. What I said was that the Labour Party's approach, as I understand it, is to let more people in and to process their claims faster. And I gently pointed out that that is very unlikely to result in fewer illegal migrants crossing the Channel. What we do need to do is suffuse our entire system with deterrence. That's why we're bringing forward new sites, like the large sites and barges. That's why we're bringing forward the illegal migration bill. We want to clear the backlog, but above all, we want to stop people coming in the first place. And the sustainable answer to that is break the business model of the people smugglers, back the illegal migration bill.
Aaron Bell.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, today's figures are too high and my constituents in Newcastle-under-Lyme will expect to see them fall. So can I welcome what the Office of National Statistics have said about them flatlining, and can I also again welcome what he announced yesterday about student dependent visas, which I think will help them to fall. Does he agree with me that my constituents will not be buying the line from the Opposition Home Secretary, because the opposition are led by an arch-Remainer who favours freedom of movement and have voted against every single measure we have brought to control migration, both legal and illegal, including our bill to stop the votes?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right. I think nobody believes the position of the Labour Party, because time and again, when they're offered the opportunity to vote for legislation that would tighten control on migration, whether that be legal or illegal, they always vote against it. We all know that our borders would be open under a future Labour government. That's why we need to take the steps that we have, and that's why your constituents should continue to back you and the Conservative Party.
In fact, the number of people waiting for their asylum applications to be processed for longer than 6 months has risen We've had the figures today, it's risen by 10,000 to 128,000. The Minister has suggested that reducing the backlog, which is a government objective, won't make any difference. Can he tell us whether he does want to reduce the backlog, whether he thinks that reducing the backlog won't make any difference, and on what basis he is now making that assessment?
Well, I've been very clear that we want to reduce the backlog. That's part of our 10-point plan to tackle illegal migration. We've put in place a series of measures to reduce bureaucracy, to streamline the process, to double the number of asylum decision makers, and those investments are already paying dividends. We're confident that the legacy backlog will be cleared over the course of the year. The point that I was making, I'm happy to reiterate, is that the faster the process, the more pull factor there is to the United Kingdom. That isn't a reason to maintain an inefficient process, but what we do need to have is a process where deterrence is suffused through every element, or else we will never break the business model of the people smugglers.
Mr. Speaker, my old home state of Western Australia has just announced even further investment in additional support for international students, saying it is important we provide such students with a safe and welcoming environment for them to flourish in. Now, education is a global market, so can you explain why it's a good thing international students will simply take their money, skills and enthusiasm elsewhere, deterred by this crackdown on their families and the support they offer, rather than choose the UK, where life for them is made ever more difficult? Hear, hear.
Well, I presume the Honourable Lady will welcome the fact that the government's international education strategy, which set a target of 600,000 international students coming to the UK every year, has been met 10 years early, and last year 605,000 international students came, and I suspect the number this year will be higher than that still. So there's absolutely no sense that the government is reneging on those commitments or creating an environment that is unwelcoming to international students. What we do want to see is universities focusing on teaching and not inadvertently creating a backdoor to immigration status here in the UK. That's why we've made the changes that we have this week, which have been broadly welcomed both by the public and by the sector.
Thank
you very much. Mr. Speaker, the Office for National Statistics has this morning published the record net migration figure of 606,000, which, by the way, includes 114,000 long-term arrivals from Ukraine and 52,000 from Hong Kong, so well below 170,000 in total. We all remember the previous Conservative Prime Minister falsely promising to the British people that he would bring net migration down to the tens of thousands, and the last but one Prime Minister promising that he would bring net migration figures to below 250,000, but he also failed miserably. I won't even mention the last Prime Minister because she didn't even last for 2 months before crashing the economy. But, Minister, the last Conservative Party manifesto pledged, and I quote, that overall net migration numbers would come down. So how's that going? What went wrong?
Yeah, well done. Well, we wouldn't have the tools to tackle net migration had we taken the Honourable Gentleman's advice and remained within the European Union. It's only as a result of the new freedoms that we have that we can control our immigration system, and he has voted against every possible opportunity to tackle either legal or illegal migration. So I'm afraid he has no foot to stand on this argument.
Martin Docker to yours.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In reviewing the net migration numbers, I wonder if the Minister has also had time to review the number of missing unaccompanied migrant children in the United Kingdom, which at last year was over 200. And if he's not had time to review that, could he maybe come back to the House and tell us how many of those missing children have been found and what his government's doing to make sure it never happens again?
Well, I have looked into this issue in great detail and have spent time with our own officials in the Home Office, with the local authorities, where we have US hotels, speaking privately to the social workers and support staff that care for them to ensure that we have the right processes in place. And I'm confident that we do. The hotels have a range of support around them, very considerable support. And when an individual, a young person, goes missing from those hotels, all of the same processes are followed as any other missing person, whether that be a child of a migrant or our own children.
Alex North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Shadow Secretary of State raised very important questions about work visas that I don't think the Minister's quite addressed yet. Those work visas have doubled since the pandemic. Is the government satisfied with that increase?
Good question.
Well, we want to have a system that enables businesses to bring foreign workers in where there are sustained skill shortages, but we want British employers to focus in the first instance on training British workers to fill those vacancies, because there are large numbers of people who are economically inactive, and the first duty of employers and of the government is to help those people back into the workforce.
Mr. Nelson.
Mr. Speaker, immigrants make an invaluable contribution to our economy. They enrich our communities, and international students in particular are needed and valued, especially in this post-Brexit labour shortage era. And yet the reactionary and hostile plans that this government are determined to put into place, and his tone in the chamber today, I think, speak very clearly of a desire to impede our ability to make the right arrangements for Scotland. Does he recognise how out of tune his government is with the views of people in Scotland and with the needs of the Scottish economy? And does he not appreciate why it is absolutely essential that we do have the power to make the right immigration arrangements for Scotland in order that our economy can thrive?
Well, the Honourable Lady's argument is not one that's borne out by any available evidence. There's no material difference between unemployment in Scotland or economic inactivity in Scotland and that in the rest of the United Kingdom. And the reports produced by the Migration Advisory Committee raise a number of questions for the Scottish Government as the policies that it could put in place to make Scotland a more attractive destination for migrants or indeed workers from elsewhere within the United Kingdom.
Ruth Campbell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There are now 172,758 people in the growing asylum backlog. I've met asylum seekers in my constituency who have been housed for well over a year in overcrowded hotel rooms, many with small children who have nowhere to play. Will the government finally admit that their illegal migration bill will make that backlog and their traumatic wait worse, not better?
Well, the Honourable Lady is absolutely wrong about that, because the illegal migration bill creates a fast and simple scheme whereby those who come here illegally, on small boats or otherwise, will not have their claims processed in months or years, but in days and weeks, and will either be returned home to a safe country, like Albania, or to a safe third country, like Rwanda. That will break the business model of the people smugglers by infusing the system with deterrence and see a very substantial reduction in the numbers entering the country in this manner.
Speaker, in Bath, the hospitality sector is a big driver of our local economy. Yet many of our wonderful hotels, restaurants, bars, pubs struggle to find enough staff, and the danger is closure or reduced working hours, which is bad for the economy. The government's chaotic approach of headline-grabbing, breaking and making immigration targets have completely eroded public trust, including those of employers. When will the government come clean with the public and acknowledge that legal migration is driven by the labour market and listen to employers like those in the hospitality sector in Bath?
Well, I think the Honourable Lady is arguing for significantly higher levels of legal migration than those we have today. I'd point out that there were 235,000 work-related visas issued last year. These are very substantial numbers. I don't think it's wise to advocate for a significant further increase. We want to see these numbers coming down.
Speaker, the Minister has already accepted we need immigration in this country for skills gaps. Now, over the last 15 years, we have heard a number of vague promises about bringing immigration down, reducing, as my honourable friend reminded us, by the Right Honourable Member for Stow reminded us, that the previous Prime Minister David Cameron wanted to bring down to tens of thousands. This has clearly not been achieved. Now, I say this to the Minister, not to score political points, but what does he believe is the right amount of migration to this country? And does it have a specific figure? And is this achievable in the next decade?
Well, we've made a very clear manifesto commitment, which is to see numbers falling sustainably. We're taking action this week, which will have a material impact. But as I said a number of times this morning, that net migration is far too high. And I worry that that is placing intolerable pressure on public services, on housing supply, and on our ability as a country to integrate new arrivals. Those are the reasons why we need to take action. If we need to take further steps, we will do.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I think the Minister needs to get his story straight on the asylum backlog. Is he saying that he wants to get it down, in which case he's not doing a very good job because it's up to 172,000, or is he saying he's keeping it high with all the attendant costs and misery of that in order to deter fresh claims?
I've been very clear that we want to get the backlog in cases down, but what I've also pointed out is that Labour's only policy with respect to illegal migration is to clear the backlog faster. Open borders, faster processing. That's not going to work.
Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister and I are clearly never going to agree on whether or not immigration is too high. But one area where we might be able to agree that it's too low is when it comes to the rural areas and the need for seasonal workers in the agri-food sector, where a shortage of such workers left millions of pounds of fresh produce to rot in the fields. Now, the Scottish Government has called for a bespoke rural visa scheme to help bring that labour that is needed to Scotland to help pick that. Would the Minister agree to meet with me so that we can tease out some of the issues around that, maybe free from the pressures to generate headlines in tomorrow's press?
Well, I'd be happy to discuss that issue with him in the spirit that he raised it today. I'm not persuaded that it's practical to create an immigration system whereby we have visas specific to certain parts of the United Kingdom or to rural versus urban areas. We do have a seasonal agricultural workers scheme. We've recently announced that will continue next year, and in fact we've offered to increase it to 55,000 people per year. Last year the scheme was capped at 45,000 and we had fewer applications than that number, so it seems to be operating at the correct level. We do have to be very careful about abuse, and we did see last year, I'm afraid, a rise in the number of people who came across on the scheme who were either exploited by gangmasters or who put in asylum claims. And it wouldn't be right for us to create a system that lead to a further increase in either of those activities.
Jim Sharp.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister will know that I believe very much that we have a moral obligation to help the widows, the children and the orphans. And that is why I believe we must have a robust immigration and asylum system that allows the vulnerable and the needy to find their new home. A constituent of mine has a hard-working young man who is seeking to bring his brother and daughter to the UK, to Northern Ireland, to my town of Newton Ards, by the way. He lost his brother, who lost all of their entire family in the Turkish earthquake. And yet we have an impasse, which I find quite frustrating, Mr. Speaker. Can the Minister underline what changes can be made to prevent an influx of unmarried young men to be allowed instead of a focus on those devastated children, lone parents and their families?
Well, I'd be happy to look at the Honourable Gentleman's specific case if he wishes. With respect to dependents of migrants coming into the UK, we do have schemes, and the numbers published by the ONS today show that there are significant numbers of migrants, dependents entering the country, or the family members of British citizens. With respect to the broader point, which he regularly champions about the UK being a force for good in the world and welcoming people for humanitarian purposes, the numbers published today show that the UK is one of the world's leading countries for humanitarian visa routes. We should be proud of that and not accept anybody who says otherwise.
That completes the urgent question. Those who wish to leave, please do so. Okay. Right, we come to the business. Can I call Shadow Leader of the House, Tangun Debonair?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To ask the Leader of the House if she will give us the forthcoming business. Before I give the
Business in the House, Mr Speaker. I would just like to make a brief statement. First of all, I want to associate myself with the remarks made in this House this week on the anniversaries of the Manchester Arena attack and the murder of Lee Rigby. My thoughts are with all those affected by those tragic events. Yesterday we had the sad news that the world has lost an icon in Tina Turner. But in the early hours of this morning, we in this place also lost our own larger-than-life character. Our former colleague, Karen Lumley, member for Redditch, from 2010 to 2017, as well as the work she did for her constituents and in the service of Parliament on the Welsh Finance and Transport Select Committees and in government as a PPS in health. She was a force for nature and a force for good. We will miss her, her amazing hairdos, and the joy she brought us all, and we will cherish the memories we have of her. The whole House, I know, will want to send our love to her family, especially Richard, Lizzie and Chris, and all who knew and loved her.
But the business is...
Forgive me. She meant a lot to all of us. The business for the week commencing the 5th of June will include, on Monday the 5th, a general debate on the role of local government in reaching net zero, followed by a general debate on delivering new housing supply. The subjects for these debates were determined by the Backbench Business Committee. On Tuesday, the 6th of June, consideration of an allocation of time motion, followed by all stages of the British Nationality Bill. On Wednesday, the 7th of June, Opposition Day debate in the name of the official opposition, subject to be announced. On Thursday, the 8th of June, a general debate on National Carers Week, followed by a general debate on the work of the Council of Europe. The subject for these debates were determined by the Backbench Business Committee. On Friday, the 9th of June, the House will not be sitting. The provisional business for the week commencing the 12th of June includes, on Monday the 12th, reconsideration of Lord's amendments to the retained EU law revocation and reform bill, followed by a debate on the risk-based exclusion of members of Parliament. On Tuesday the 13th of June, remaining stages of the procurement bill. Wednesday the 14th of June, Opposition Day debate in the name of the Scottish National Party, subject to be announced, followed by a general debate subject to be confirmed. On Thursday, the 15th of June, business to be determined by the Backbench Business Committee, and on Friday, the 16th of June, the House will not be sitting. Right Honourable and Honourable Members will also wish to know that, subject to progress of business, the House will rise on the 20th of July for the summer recess and return on Monday, the 4th of September. The House will rise for the conference recess at the close of business on Tuesday the 19th of September and return on Monday the 16th of October. And the House will rise for the Christmas recess at the close of business on Tuesday the 19th of December and return on Monday the 8th of January 2024. And I will announce further recess dates and future business in the usual way.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And first of all, may I join the Leader of the House. This is obviously a really sad moment when we lose one of our colleagues. I know she was loved across this place, and I know that colleagues such as my former honourable friend Louise Ellman and others really appreciated the personal support she gave them. And for her dedicated work on the Transport Select Committee, we join the Leader of the House in sending love and condolences to her family. I will come on to Tina Turner shortly, but I also